An emerging ADHD drug called Solriamfetol has been recently shown to reduce ADHD symptoms by 45%. But is there more to the story? Stick around, let's talk about it. Hi friends! Welcome back to Cygoth. My name is Courtney, and before we get started, I wanted to wish you all a very happy belated holiday season and New Year. My mister was at home for about 3 weeks over the holiday season, so I couldn't get any work done. Between him playing Dota all day and me playing Baldur's Gate and drinking all day, just couldn't do any work. Such a chore. But now that his ass is back to the grind, I get to work again. But anyway, a little while ago, I saw something really interesting on my Facebook feed, and I wanted to look more into it. And this was the first article I saw about it. A new drug called Solriamfetol was apparently shown to reduce ADHD symptoms by 45%. But first, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to see more medical content. Let's get into it. I've stalled long enough. So naturally, I was a little bit curious, having ADHD myself, and I wanted to have a look at the study itself to see how it got the results. The study was called the FOCUS study, the Forward Treatment of Attention Deficit and Hyperactivity using Solriamfetol, which I'm going to call Sol from now on because too many syllables. But before we look into the study itself, we have to ask ourselves, what is solriamfetol? Sol belongs to a class of drugs called NDRIs, or norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitors. So they work pretty much in the same way as bupropion, dexamphetamine, and methylphenidate. Both of those are very well-established ADHD drugs. Sol is often used in patients with narcolepsy or chronic sleepiness from obstructive sleep apnea. And because it is a non-stimulant, it is thought to have far less side effects and adverse events as opposed to dexamphetamine and methylphenidate, which also have the risk of misuse. That is not to say that Sol is entirely risk-free. The Food and Drug Administration warned that blood pressure and heart rate increases are common, as well as the possible development of psychiatric conditions such as anxiety or insomnia. As with any drug you take, you and your doctor have to weigh up the pros and cons of using it. Yes, using Sol may destroy your sleep pattern, but if it really does what this study says it can and reduce your ADHD symptoms significantly, then maybe it's worth it. But if you have blood pressure problems, then maybe not. And now, finally, let's talk about the FOCUS study. Now, I know there's a lot of terms here, probably some of which you're not really familiar with. So let's break each of them down and then we'll put it all together in the typical Cygoth fashion. Phase 3 is the final stage of a study before a drug can be approved, so there's stage 1, 2, and 3. Multi-center means that the study was conducted in several places all across the US, so all different states, to sample different populations. Randomization means that the participants were randomly assigned a place within the study. In this case, participants were randomly put on either a placebo or the drug, some of which were at 150 milligrams and others at 300 milligrams. Double blindness means that neither the participants or the researchers know whether or not the participant is taking the drug or the placebo. So no one knows what the fuck is going on. And speaking of placebos, what is a placebo? Because it's placebo-controlled, it means that a drug-free treatment was being used as a baseline to compare to the actual treatment. If you didn't have a placebo control, how would you know whether or not there is any benefit of using either of the drug strengths? Finally, parallel grouping is where the results of all the groups are compared to each other instead of in isolation. And this helps the researchers understand the patterns that may come up across the groups. Is 300 milligrams more or less effective than 150? Who knows? We don't know until we test it. And it may not be as obvious as it seems. So what does it all mean? Let's psychothify this. 516 participants were taken all across the US to be enrolled in this study. Each participant was assigned either placebo, 150 or 300 milligram groups. And of course, the participants nor the researchers assigned to them knew what they were taking. And the final results for each group were compared to each other to see if there were any patterns emerging. And they accounted for several areas which could create bias, which is really important in any study because you don't want anything skewing results. And especially if you publish that in a journal, you'd be picked apart. Overall, I think it's a pretty well designed study. I especially liked that they used a multi-center approach so that it's bringing participants from different parts of the US, so more wealthy parts and less wealthy parts. However, I personally would like to see more analysis into their socioeconomic statuses, plus looking at any psychosocial factors that might be at play. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you, but wealthier families have better access to healthcare that can help reduce symptoms. I personally am fine with just using my medication, although I am starting to see an ADHD coach, which is costing me out the wazoo. It's money I don't have. And some people in the US don't have that. All they can do is rely on their medication because it's a lot cheaper than therapy. And that's okay too. In every study, participants have to meet certain criteria to be included. In this case, the major criterion was to be diagnosed with ADHD as according to the DSM-5, which is the major diagnostic tool in diagnosing mental health disorders. If you don't have ADHD and you take the drug, you could be saying, oh, I don't have ADHD symptoms. This is great, which would skew results into the positive. We don't want that. We want to make sure that it's actually doing its job. The other criteria were fairly common, so they introduced an adult age range between 18 and 59, although a pediatric study is apparently coming. So when that comes out, if you want me to talk about it, I absolutely will. And finally, of course, written informed consent. So you want to tell them everything that could happen. You want to tell them step by step, this is what we're doing, these are the risks, and you wanna? It also has to be written so that the participant can keep a copy as well as the researchers, so that if any time the participant withdraws consent, then it's written down, you go, okay, totally fine, obfuscate. There's also criteria to exclude certain people from the study. Their main one is to exclude people already using Sol. It could skew results in the positive or the negative. And what if they're changing dose? What if they were already on 75 milligrams, but they're put in the 300 category? You know, the risk of side effects goes up exponentially. There's also the unwillingness to comply. If you're not gonna do what they say, what's the point? And finally, I think this is the most important one. All participants have to be medically screened by the researchers to make sure they're healthy enough to participate. So if somebody is on blood pressure medications or they have an uncontrolled heart rate, the researchers don't want to put them in a higher risk because of taking this drug. So like we've covered, the 516 participants were assigned into the placebo 150 or 300 milligram group. They were told to take their tablet once a day, every day, for the 6-week trial period. And they measured the effectiveness of the treatment using the Adult ADHD Investigator Symptom Report Scale, or the AISRS, which I'm just going to be calling the symptom scale from now on. The trial record doesn't actually state how often the symptoms were being measured by the symptom report scale, but I'm going to guess that it was once a week. Unfortunately, the results weren't actually posted onto the trial page. I googled the name of the study to see if the AI overview sent links to more variations of the trial record, but all I could find were news articles. However, they reported the results in quite a robust way, so it's enough for me to comment on. After being assigned a group and their symptoms assessed using the symptom report scale, the following groups had these as their averages. These are severity out of 54. The placebo group got 37.9, the 150 group got 39.1, and the 300 milligram group got 38.3. So this was all done before they started taking their medications, baseline assessment. And honestly, they could not have planned those values better. So straight away, you can see that across the entire cohort, the symptom severity on average is pretty much the same. So it's going to be a lot easier for researchers to be able to pick apart those patterns that they may see. Get to the fucking results! Just let me cook, alright? I'm getting there. Alright, so where'd they get the 45% from? They found that in the 150 milligram group, their symptom report scores dropped by 17.7. So 39.1 down 17.7. So that is 45%. But, and it's a big but, the placebo group found a decrease by 14.3 points. So they found a 38% reduction rate even within the placebo group. Man, if I could trick my brain like that and not need medication anymore. You know what? It's story time with Cygoth again. Let's go. So for a period of my life, I was unmedicated for my ADHD. My psychiatrist had taken me off Dexies, or dexamphetamine. He prescribed me atomoxetine, which is very commonly prescribed for people with ADHD that don't want stimulants. So atomoxetine, or Strattera, is a selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. So similar to dexamphetamine and methylphenidate, it regulates the amount of norepinephrine that's going through your brain. And it did jack shit. I took it for a month, and I was desperate for it to work, because I'm like, I can't hold down a job. I can't even look after myself. I can't feed myself. I can't do anything productive in my life because of my ADHD. And I'm not saying it's the worst case out there, but it is pretty bad. And I think I'm allowed to say that. So I was on the atomoxetine for a month, and if anything, it made my mental health worse because I was expecting it to work. And I went to the psychiatrist and I'm like, there's nothing. It feels like I'm taking nothing. And it's more expensive than dexamphetamine. So he put me on long-acting dexamphetamine, lisdexamphetamine, which is also known as Vyvanse. It's working a lot better than atomoxetine did. And again, I want to stress, this is not medical advice. This is just me talking about my experience. I don't know why I went on that little soliloquy, but you know what? It's my channel. I'm allowed to do story times. Okay. Before we get to the next section, I just remembered something. A huge aspect of any sort of study is where they got their funding. And of course, who else was involved in the study? In this case, some real sussy bucker shit happened, and I found that the manufacturers of Sol, Axum Therapeutics, was involved in this study. Their involvement was listed down as collaborators and investigators, but I would not be surprised if they bankrolled this. I don't even think I need to tell you that could introduce some significant bias. And because we don't have a journal article or a full data set, we have nothing to really show the extent of Axum Therapeutics' involvement in this study. So I tried to look at similar studies, and they were either inaccessible through my uni account, or they were even more vague. I fucking pay $2,000 a semester to go to university and stress myself out to the point of breaking down, and I can't get access to the articles I need. So it was really frustrating because I wanted to see if there were any other independent studies with sort of similar results. So what's the future for this study? If it was up to me, I would have it rolled out internationally. So often with studies, they start off really small, and either those researchers or other researchers expand the scope so that there is more data to add to the literature base. You know, they look at different factors, other treatments, socioeconomic status. If it was rolled out internationally, we would also have a look at cultural factors as well. There are some countries that may stigmatize ADHD and not offer much help, whereas other countries in the world might have a lot of support system, even accessible for people with low socioeconomic status. You know, I would like to see how ADHD treatments occur in China versus Indonesia versus India versus Iraq versus the UK, Australia. You know, limiting it to one country limits the cultural values of treating people with mental illnesses. You know, it's stigmatized in some countries more than others. We need to be able to get data on that to really see if it's effective. A little bit of dose tweaking might have to occur as well, as it was found that the 300 milligrams wasn't much better than the 150 milligrams in terms of symptom reduction, but also had more side effects. So naturally, maybe we should shy away from, the more side effects. So what I found in this particular study that I couldn't read, they used several more mental health scales as opposed to just using the AASRS, which is what the focus study used. So this would more broadly assess the mental health of the participant, which I feel in future studies would be beneficial, because not all ADHD symptoms are specifically just ADHD. And that's my next point. ADHD is extremely comorbid with conditions such as anxiety and depression. And nowhere in the focus study trial page did it say anything about excluding people with other mental health conditions. You've been diagnosed with ADHD? Yes. Was it diagnosed with a DSM-5? Yes. Cool, let's go. Oh wait, but I said let's go. If you have ADHD and anxiety, you might feel extra jittery, you might have more racing thoughts, sweating a lot. And we're not going to see a true reduction of ADHD symptoms if another source of those symptoms is still there. And one last thing. Say these people do have comorbid conditions. What if they're medicated? Is there any danger of using Sol with other types of antidepressants, anxiolytics, mood stabilizers? We don't know because we don't have the data. It doesn't say in the trial page if these participants had mental health conditions, if they took any other medication. There's just no data, so we're not gonna know. So what do I think overall? I think for a phase 3 study, I'm not impressed with how little data is being presented. But I'm hoping to high heaven that a journal article will be published once everything is finalized. It said it's already been finalized, but writing takes time. There's a lot of suppositions that I've made. I've had to make guesses about things, and I don't like doing that without something to fall back on. It's just how I work, how I think as a scientist. And even though suppositions are important, it's important to think outside the box. It's important to ask questions. I just don't like not being right. I like to have all the facts behind me when I present a video so that you peeps know what I'm talking about is correct, that you're getting the right information. I'm just pulling a lot of shit out of a hat and hoping you'll be happy with it. But yes, I'm looking forward to seeing future renditions of this study, if they get rolled out overseas, if it takes other conditions into account. Because like I said, ADHD very rarely exists in a bubble. So looking at those other conditions is important. So I hope you liked this. Little bit different to what I usually do. I wouldn't spend all this time on a single article, but I thought it was really interesting, and there's a lot to gain by looking into the process behind getting results. Because, like I've said, there is a 45% decrease in symptoms with people taking 150 milligrams, but that's only 7% better than the placebo trial. It's another case of weighing up your options. Alright, I've got some more videos in the pipeline, and now that I'm free until the end of February, going back to uni, I have all the time in the world to pump out some more videos before I disappear into my hole again. And before you go, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to see some more medical content. Alright, until next time, bye friends!